of our external participants joining us. Let people, give them a minute to come in. So welcome to everybody who's joining us live. I'm Kyra of WomenED Spain, and shortly we'll be introducing our panelists. My co-host and I would like to welcome you to this, what number edition are we of this series?
Oh,
Angeline?
I think probably about 6 or 7. So we've run so we've run a few heart-to-heart conversations with ECIS, kind of focus on international schools, and we also run some heart-to-heart conversations for WomenED in general that are kind of on more generic topics as well.
I feel like this might be our sort of 10th or 11th together, and maybe So we'll just give everyone another couple of seconds to come in before we start to welcome our guests. And I'm just going to mute myself while I deal with my puppy who's trying to get in.
And so let us know, introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining us from. And thank you very much for finding time in your busy weeks at this time of the school year to join us today. So welcome. Hi.
To a cupboard.
Yeah, Cam. Welcome, Cam.
Yeah, I can see a lot of new names and people who haven't joined us for others in the series. So we can only hope that you were lured in by our slightly controversial topic title, which we knew would get people talking, and we knew it would mean that there was some interest. So welcome to this session on feminist international schools. And let's just take it away and start by introducing our amazing panelists. We have been really privileged, I think, by the being able to have 3 amazing women come and join us at relatively short notice. So first of all, let's let Angeline take it away and just explain the mission of these talks, and then we'll introduce you to the guests.
Sure. So if you're not familiar with WomenED, it's really a grassroots volunteer movement that started from a hashtag and grew into meetups and then unconferences that it kind of sparked, it was in the UK where it started. And then as it expanded globally, WomenED groups started all around. And so I'm part of WomenED Germany, WomenED DE, and I can see a lot of my regional leaders also in the attendees. So we've got some people from Berlin also here, and from Frankfurt, and so on. So welcome. And Kyra is from WomenED Spain. So you can see that there are a lot of different groups. And I just had someone contact me today about WomenED France, and so so this is how it gets started. So if you're in a country and you're thinking, oh, we don't have a WomenED group, you can start one as well. And so we'd love to support you with how to do that. And also from ECIS, there is a new Women in Education Special Interest Group. And so Kyra and I are also part of that special interest group. And whilst WomenED is really looking at supporting aspiring and existing women in leadership to help them rise and help them with their leadership paths, the ECIS Women in Education is supporting all women in education to narrow the gender equity gap. And we're looking at supporting you in terms of maybe the individual mindsets and challenges that happen, like biases that exist, but also on an institutional level. So whilst both are very complementary groups, there is also slightly different focuses, which kind of meld together in these sets of series of webinars that we have in Heart Talk Conversations, where we try and address a combination of those issues. And
Great.
So over to you.
Thank you, Angeline. Thank you. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Unfortunately, we are in a webinar setting, meaning we can't hear or see you, but we would love to hear from you. And we are famous in these chats for having lots of ideas coming in live in the chat. So please do use that feature to interact with us. We will be recording. So if you know somebody who was interested in the session but couldn't make it live, or you have to hop off for any reason, it will be posted onto the WomenED YouTube channel. And it should also, a recording, be going up on the ECIS Women in Education homepage as well. You can engage with us throughout, or anything that you think about afterwards, feel free to tweet at us using our hashtags WomenED, hashtag Heart to Heart, or any of our handles, of which there are many. I'll explain which one belongs to who of us in a moment. But let's take it away and introduce our guests. So we'd like to welcome, first of all, Edith Johnson. She is the co-founder and CEO of Be Her Lead. Edith is a teacher who has experience both in the UK and international schools. She is now the co-founder of a social enterprise which trains women in teaching to run workshops for disadvantaged girls in their schools and to raise aspirations. So these program teachers are trained and supported with workshops, skills and knowledge to help them face internal and external challenges. They also work on changing school cultures, and we're big fans of her work. Edith is also a Shackleton Foundation leader, something which I think has happened fairly recently, and you can reach her at Be Her Lead on Twitter. I'll pass over to Angeline now, who will introduce Kathleen.
Yeah. And so Kathleen comes from us today from the International School of Helsinki, where she's the head of school. And she also serves as a commissioner for NEASC, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And so as an educational leader, she's been advising national systems, but she also works to outside of the industry too with edtech startups and early career leaders, specializing in helping people develop sort of innovative and different ways that are going to really work for the future. So, and her recent workshops have really centered on the neuroscience of learning space and the power of disruption. And so we're really happy to have her here with us today. So welcome, Kathleen.
And hashtag Twitter handles are all at the bottom, so you know who is who. So last but not least, we have Nick Ponsford. Nick is co-CEO and founder of the Global Equality Collective. I really can't remember how I came across the Global Equality Collective now, other than she is an amazingly connected person who has, many Twitter followers in common, and I'm always seeing her work being retweeted. Nicole has had a teaching career as well. She's won the National Teaching Award for her use of new technologies and inclusive work across the south of England. She's also a writer and has been a columnist for the Times Educational Supplement and The Guardian. She speaks passionately and wholeheartedly about educational inclusion. She's an edtech specialist, of course, and her first book, Techno Teaching, Taking Your Practice to the Next Level in a Digital World, was published by Harvard University Press. So you can follow her on Twitter as well with the handle there at the bottom. So I'm really excited for us to get going and meet everybody. But before that, Angeline has some data to throw at you so that we understand the context of this conversation in the wider format.
Yeah, so whilst I think if you were to ask any educational leader who identifies as being female, we wouldn't need data to tell you that there's struggles for us in how we rise. And but I think that for some of us who would like to see that, the most recent data that has come across based from international schools is from the Diversity Collaborative. And they've shared with us data sets that actually touched on many different intersections of identity. So there was some gender, race, and also nationalities of which passports you hold. And I've just pulled here just the gender data. And what you're seeing here is some of the results that they had with questions that were asked. And so they've got which aspects of your identity positively impacted your search. So when you were looking, you can see males thought that this was an advantage as compared to females, and which aspect positively impacted your treatment as an existing leader. And you can see also the discrepancy there. And when it came to when searching for a school leadership position, you can see the big difference. 47% of females identified that it negatively impacted their search for a leadership position, and 51% said it negatively impacted their treatment when they were in a position of leadership. And this data was also, they did ask questions for people who identified as being non-binary gender, but there was such a low response that they couldn't share that. But so I think a lot of institutions are trying to be a lot more inclusive about how they gather data as well, and so it's exciting to see these new bits of information coming out. So maybe next slide, please, Kyra. And here is a slightly more complicated sets of result data, and I can share with you in the chat in a moment the Diversity Collaborative, which came from the ISS, published the International School Services. They published this in a report as well, and so you can get direct access to the full.
In the chat.
Amazing people. Okay, so yeah, and so you can see here that it's the leadership pipeline where there's really big issues. So if you get the number of interviews that were offered to schools and numbers of jobs that were applied to, so females are applying more. But then when it comes to actually getting getting an interview, it's about 50-50. But then still, when you go through that interview process and getting down to being a finalist for a position and actually getting that result in the position, the numbers are also, again, at there isn't equity there. And so there's still, while there's progress, and where people are being more courageous in applying for things, there's still challenges that are systemic that are holding women back as well. And so, yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Kyra.
I'm so keen to get started and hear from you all, and I think the data and the setting the scene is so important. What we want to know is whether this has been your experience, whether you're here because you consider yourselves feminists, or whether that's a word that is difficult and has different perceptions for you. And I think that's the first question we will ask for the panelists, because we know that it's a word that can divide opinion. We've discussed in previous webinars that it could be something that we consider generational, that there's more comfort in younger generations with openly declaring themselves feminists. So is feminism for everybody, and how much or to what extent are our panelists feminists? So I don't know who wants to take that first. I can see Kathleen's face, so maybe we should start with you.
Sure, I can take that question. And I think there's I think there really is an interesting generational piece to this. And I think I'm the oldest member of this panel. And what I span much of the feminist movement from the 60s to now. I grew up at a time when the women's rights movement had just kind of come into fruition when I was a child. And I remember there were even like T-shirts that little girls wore with like Equal Rights Amendment and things like this. And I also remember in the 80s when this changed, that it became very unfashionable to align yourself with the feminist movement. And I can look back now and see that I took on that internalized misogyny during that time, for sure. And I often worked in places where I was the only female. And the way you got along, which I realize now, at the time, was to reject that, to maybe cast aspersions against women, like I'm not that kind of woman, was kind of the error when I was in college and other places. And I can look back now and see that that served me, and I have regret of that time period. And I hope that I've learned a lot since then, and I'm highly influenced by what was to come later, maybe in third wave feminism, with people like Bell Hooks, who's quoted here, and Audre Lorde. And I would say, yes, I'm a feminist, but when I see it as a very unstable term. And for me, I also want to express very strongly the intersectionality that goes along with that term, and something that I have also experienced, not only as a school leader, but just as a woman walking around in everyday life kind of issues. And I'm gay, I'm Jewish, I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. I am a woman who's a leader. I understand how all these nuances played out in my career. And I wonder now about how other people could have a journey that wasn't the same that I had to go through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I can see the chat is going crazy with recommendations for Susan Faludi's book, Backlash, which documents this change that you mentioned that happens in the 80s with the differentiation or the difference in meaning in the word and what it encapsulates. And I think thank you also for raising the intersectionality issue, because there could be ways in which, you know, the word is also not inclusive or not inclusive enough to describe what its full meaning is. And we have people agreeing, saying, you know, the intersectionality is crucial. I don't want to attach to feminism if it means exclusion and oppression of other marginalized groups. We don't need more rich white ladies speaking over people. That's a great comment. Feminism also benefits men in many ways too. Many do not realize this though, and I think, you know, that's what we need to kind of get to. So maybe we can move to Edith, who I think, you know, is probably our panelist, our youngest panelist, and then we can move back to Nick and see if there's any overlap there in terms of the way you've perceived the word, or how you feel about describing yourselves.
Yeah, thank you for, I'm so thrilled that I'm the youngest panelist. This makes me feel, I'm turning 30 next year, and I guess most of my work is with teenage girls, so I'm getting more and more used to being the oldest in the room, let alone the voice of the youth. So it's a nice change. Yeah, I mean, to pick up on Rachel's point in the chat and what Kathleen said, I think that I've always thrown around intersectionality as a word that I want to associate myself with ever since I got involved with feminism at uni. But I think it's only really since Black Lives Matter that I've properly understood that in order to call yourself an intersectional feminist, it doesn't just mean saying that women of color and marginalized genders as well can be involved in your feminist activism, but also lending a hand, or more than a hand, giving yourself over to anti-racist work, like being like engaging in the struggle for trans rights as well. It doesn't just mean including people in conversations, it also means doing that work too, what you can. So I think that thinking about where we've gone as a journey as an organization with Be Her Lead, I think that we've, if anything, kind of decreased the numbers of workshops that we run with girls where feminism is the thing that we're explaining, and we've actually broadened out the scope of the topics that we discuss in these groups with girls in schools. And this term we had a whole session that was run by women of color who do Be Her Lead, all about how to use it as a platform for anti-racist work in your school. So I think yeah, I think intersectionality is not just about other things being involved in feminism, but also about feminism being involved in other things. In terms of whether I consider myself a feminist, obviously I do. But I also totally get that the word has so many associations which are really beneficial for me and make me feel, you know, fine calling myself a feminist, but that's not the case for everyone. So sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I think it's not a helpful term to use, at least straight away in conversations. And with our work for Be Her Lead, so we train female teachers, most of whom strongly identify as feminist. We train them to run workshops with groups of teenage girls, largely from disadvantaged backgrounds, many of them of color, and largely with like confidence issues. We train them to run workshops on issues that are relevant to them, and they get to pick and choose which ones feel right. So these range from talking about mental health issues, body image, relationships, right the way through to things which are more focused on activism. So anti-racism, feminism, even things like period poverty, which are issues really close to these girls' lives. But I think that often we find that the teachers don't go in saying, this is a feminist society, this is a feminist group, because that really does alienate lots of girls. And I think the reason for that is that there's still this, I think, misunderstanding, but it's kind of passing the buck to just say it's a misunderstanding, because it must come from somewhere. There's this assumption that it's a judgmental phrase or judgmental word, and that if you call yourself a feminist, that comes with a whole load of other things that you have to reject, you know, like makeup, you know, like dating, like lots of kind of traditional markers of femininity. And I think that there's still lots of work to be done to, you know, get across this idea that to identify as a feminist, you don't have to be a perfect feminist, whatever that is. It's more about forgiving yourself, giving yourself choices, and acknowledging where the influences on our choices and the kind of the feelings that we're having in society, where that's coming from. So I think often girls that we work with and teachers as well feel like feminism is something that's like weighing down on them, when it should be something that's lifting them up, and it should be something that's helping them forgive themselves and be kind to themselves, rather than giving themselves a hard time for not being a good enough feminist.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really complex answer. And I imagined maybe naively that it would be a simpler answer, because you said, you know, of course I am, and you were able to communicate this with ease, which is something that, you know, in my feeling is generationally getting easier. But maybe we can hear from Nick on this point. Do you consider yourself a feminist? How do you feel about the terminology? And is it for everybody in your world, Nick, or have you found pushback?
I think the issue is that being a feminist has a stereotype in itself, and now we are, if you read The Guilty Feminist, which really helps you sort of navigate this space as well, when I read it, I felt that I would be fifth wave, because that is more about taking action, and that is the work that the Global Equality Collective do. We are an online community. We have collected all the experts. We've got about 300, and I'm really pleased that Edith and be her leader in our collective as well. But we've actually created a digital solution as well, that takes you beyond the what do we do about it. So in that, I think we are, but I do think there's issues within feminism. I think there's a range of different voices, and there are anti-trans rights within feminism. I do think that it is based more on the sexes rather than intersectionality. It just so happens that women can come in from a variety of reasons. And maybe actually it is the time that we start to think about changing the language again, and creating new terms around this that actually are more inclusive. I do think as well that you're right, Edith, when you were saying about kind of the negative slant with it as well. I feel very much that diversity, equality, inclusion is an amazing thing. It's really exciting. Statistics we know are horrendous across the board. I like to look more to the future than the past. And so I think maybe it's time we take away the labels a little bit and look at what the actions and the outcomes are more around it. So I think they're good questions to start with. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. And you know, the terminology needing an update is something that we can also work towards in this session to give people alternatives to use. Let's move forward, because we've already touched on some of the areas that you've mentioned in terms of feminism going alongside actively diverse protocols in schools and diversity, equality, inclusion work that's happening, decolonizing curriculums, being anti-racist. And I know Ange wanted to point attention to a couple of movements that have helped us frame this conversation and think about the work that needs to be done in terms of framing feminist conversations in schools as aligned with some of these aims. So maybe you could take us through this slide, and then we'll go to the panelists, Ange.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight what I have felt is that a lot of the senior students in the international school I work in are much more comfortable calling themselves feminists, and there is a group in two 16-year-old girls in a public school here in Berlin who started an Instagram and a hashtag called Keine Schule ohne Feminismus, which is like no school without feminism. And so because they were sick of reading literature that was, male, pale, and stale, and they were interested in and so when they wrote about what are we about, they described the intersectionality that you brought up, and then how that we should have all of these different identities represented. And so they started as a hashtag, and they got a lot of publicity, and a lot of different schools are now involved in them as well. And so and another group is started by 2 alumni students for the organization to Decolonize international schools. And you can see that they on Instagram, they shared that international schools should be talking about, they also mentioned intersectionality, and then they talked sort of about, well, if we're in a patriarchal white supremacist type world, then what does it look like? And so our students and our alumni are calling us out, and they're saying we need to decolonize the curriculum and our school structures, and we need to be anti-racist as well. So in recognition of all of this, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. If we recognize that most of our schools are founded on patriarchal values, then should schools also be actively feminist in the same way that we're being called out to be anti-racist, for example? What are your thoughts on this, Kathleen?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think we're at an interesting point of time. I've appreciated the call on international schools to decolonize and take up anti-racist work, because I think this is so important. My concern is that I think some of this work is being centered in very privileged schools who have a lot of money to maybe tokenize some of this work. And so I wonder about how long this lasts. So is this like, a year and a half, 2 years of this, and then everyone kind of drops this topic and moves on to something else, and it becomes something that's not deeply embedded in schools? I think for schools to take on the mantle of being a feminist school requires that the entire system has to be overturned and examined and critically looked at. And I can tell you that the international schools are not built upon this. They're built on colonizing. They're built on rich locations, and the history of our schools matches what has happened around the world. And then there's this also very large movement of for-profit, family-owned corporate schools that have no interest in this at all, which is the majority of international schools. So we're talking about like this very small elite tier of schools that are willing to take this on. And then there's this tiny, tiny bit of school leaders who are even interested in this topic, or who are just tokenizing this topic. So I think some of the messaging that I want to give today is that unless we truly take power in these situations and in these schools, I don't think much is going to change, because it's the whole system is based to support a colonization process, maybe.
Yeah. So it sounds like whilst you would perhaps like to see a change, you're kind of there are some equity kind of tropes and traps that that we shouldn't fall into, and that one of them being like being tokenistic about our approach, and that if we're going to be actively feminist in our transformation of schools, it needs to be complete, and not just looking at not just a one-off event or just looking at just the curriculum, but thinking about the whole infrastructure. Those are excellent points. Nick,
just to add one other point to that.
Yeah.
There's very few leaders out there who are even thinking about this. So I hope we find some more in this group. And I'm always encouraging women to take charge.
Excellent. Good, great. Yes. A good call out for everyone here. Yeah. Nick?
Yeah, real call to action. Yeah, sorry. Nick, go ahead.
Right, because I think I've got the solution. Everything you're saying, really, really excites me. So basically, I started teaching in 2001 in the secondary in England. I had I've experienced in boarding school. I actually lived in Gibraltar for a little bit as well. And so I came out of that and actually ended up teaching in some of the most deprived areas in the country, and have worked internationally. So yeah, the book was done in partnership with Harvard as well. And I really felt exactly the same, that diversity, equality and inclusion is done in a very tokenistic way. What tends to happen around gender and feminism, it's pushed by white women in particular. And I do think in education, you will have those white women maybe fighting harder for headship routes and for retirement plans than they will have maybe for girls in STEM, girls against violence, boys, more men in early years and those kinds of things. And so I realised pretty early on that the way to improve students' experiences was to improve the teachers' attitudes to these things. And so with the GEC app we've created, we call it the app for short, but actually it is a very sophisticated way of educating your entire school staff. We launched it in December, and in our first term, we've already got 50 schools on board and reached 35,000 students. And we've just started having international schools asking us for it. It's only £150 for the whole year, which means that price is taken out of it entirely. But it was written with clinical psychologists at the Universities of Surrey, Kent and UCL. And in it, an organisation, the first part of it is that a leader will go through and I call it the Kaplunk model for diversity and inclusion. So you dissect all the straws and marbles. It could be your recruitment, or it could be your curriculum. It could be your flexible working, or it could be how you work with your families. And then the second step is all the staff get a say. So the staff have a voice, and all the data you get can be dissected by the 9 characteristics of the English Equalities Act, but also single parent rights and socioeconomic status. And in it, we have a e-learning hub of 35 modules, which contain everything from anti-racism to how conversations. We've had the team behind Pregnant and Screwed that are very big over here. The solicitors have gone through the HR and the law side. And we're bringing in, I'm just about to bring in women's health, where we're looking at things from periods through to menopause to educate staff. We are looking at Gypsy Roma travellers. We're looking at diversity and neurodiversity. We're adding to it all the time. And the reason that we did this is because it needs systemic change. And what happens is schools can come out with a lovely badge, so they can be nice and competitive with each other. But the whole idea was to flip how we look at teacher training, how we embed these things, so we don't get literally books in a box that are passed from class to class for feminism, that actually that school leadership want to do that, and they do it in a slick way. And they do it in a slick way because our other pathways are corporates, so it looks good, it looks the part. And we actually raised 150,000 at the start of lockdown last year to build it. So it's something that education has to see. So it is the first app for diversity and inclusion for schools and businesses, and it is doing what it's meant to do. And it lets schools see the blind spots of things they don't know, because they have to check their privileges as they come as part of it. So Kathleen, the things that you said are a problem. I feel that that gives me a real challenge that maybe we can help. So if there's anyone here who wants to become of our international pilot, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'd definitely love to hear more.
We have some great questions coming into the chat that I want to make sure we have time for. So we're going to skip forward a slide and get to the context of what we wanted to discuss in terms of Edith's outlook. And I know that Angeline wanted to just cover the article that Edith has written, which sort of gave us the spark to hold this webinar, which was about actively creating more feminist institutions. So take it away, Angeline, and let's move forward with our questions for all of the panelists.
Sure. Yeah, so maybe if you could go to the next slide, Kyra. Yeah, so and if you click again, that would be great. Yeah, so in a blog post that Edith wrote, you mentioned that we need schools which identify as feminist institutions, Okay, yeah, and exactly what everyone here has been saying, you know, not just a curriculum and educational policy that embraces the values, but it's not just an optional add-on. And so if we're going to imagine a feminist school system, what would it look like? And so Edith, I just wanted to ask you, you know, since you published this article and your call out for schools to become feminist institutions, what has been the response?
You make it sound so grandiose. It's just a blog I wrote a year ago.
We believe it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why Nick's app, sorry to call it an app, I can't remember which word you used that was better than app. I think the reason why things like that are so great is because they are so, they get across this idea of intersectionality, that all of these issues are not competing with each other, but they're all part of the same bigger goal, which is equity, which is justice, which is a world that's better for everyone to live in. And I think part of the problem that Kathleen really identified is that a lot of the structures of our education system are themselves founded on colonialism, racism, patriarchy, like all of these things. So it kind of, it's almost like you're kind of like painting a falling house sometimes. And I think that perhaps what does need to happen is a shift in terms of the way in which we envisage the reason for education, and also related to that, the way in which schools are held accountable. So my main experiences of the UK education system, and for a very long time, and I think this is still the case, the UK education system has been pretty obsessed with white working class boys as a group who are underperforming academically. And there are lots of good reasons for that, that focus, but it's also a really quite poisonous discourse as well, which is also related to other kind of quite reactionary discourses over the past 20 years or so. And it has meant that the idea of marginalized groups and also more broadly girls doing well in school academically has been turned into a kind of problem. This idea that, oh, girls are outperforming boys academically, that must be a bad thing. That's a bad thing. We need to sort out that problem, rather than seeing, you know, that the successes of girls as being a good thing. And then also overlooking the fact that, you know, okay, white working class boys are a huge group in this country, but the lowest performing group are Black boys. And, you know, it's also a lot more complicated than that, because after school, then that's when the pay gap emerges. At university, girls are less like, young women are less likely than men to get first class degrees. Like if we look at the pandemic over the past year, the groups which have been affected the most are marginalized groups, and in particular young women, and young women of color. So I think like part of the problem here is that schools, certainly in the UK, are still mainly held accountable by the academic success of their students, and also the problems which they tackle are often related to that. So a lot of the time, Be Her Lead schools, well, with Be Her Lead, then we focus a lot on issues like self-harm, like a huge issue for teenage girls in the UK and also across the world, mental health, anxiety, body image issues, eating disorders. And those issues aren't always a problem for the school, especially if the student is really hardworking and capable. So they're not really addressed. So I've rambled a bit, but my main point is that it kind of also needs to be about how the schools are held to account. And yeah, I totally agree also with the thing about the tick boxing that Kathleen was identifying. I think that's still just a massive thing. We've seen it recently with the Everyone's Invited movement here. Like our partner Bold Voices, who do workshops in schools on gender-based violence, have had a real surge in public boys' schools inviting them to go and do workshops. But yeah, whether or not anything happens after that day of workshops, who's to say?
If I could jump in,
Please do.
some of the worries that I have is that unlike national systems, the international school system is made up of independent schools that are accountable really to no one except themselves and to the local boards. And my wonderings come from, you know, I've spent 50 years of part of this girl power movement, and it's encouraged the girls. And I was one who believed in all this. And there's always this attention that somehow we're going to build this cadre of strong women who are going to overcome this. But somewhere along the line, we get too nice, or there's a pullback. And the pressure for schools and systems to really change is incredibly weak. And, you know, what I see happening, like I said, around the schools, a lot of tokenistic stuff at the moment, but when are we really going to be upset about this? When are we really going to be upset about how women are treated around the world, and girls still not going to school, and gender violence and racism, like all of these things? Like Black Lives Matter, I think, was, you know, a charge moment for anti-racism, and I'm so thankful for that. When is this moment for feminism? When is this moment to really say what we do in schools is completely unacceptable for students? And this has to do with racism, patriarchal systems, LGBTQ support. There's an article just came out again that the highest rate of suicide is for our LGBTQ populations. There's that quote from Audre Lorde, I'm probably gonna misquote it, but something about like, we can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, and someone can fix that for me. We're still trying to do this really internally in little pieces, but I am at a stage in my life, I'm like, come on, guys, we've been doing this for 40 years. Nothing has really changed significantly. I'm looking for radical solutions. Nick, I'm really excited to hear what you're doing with this app, and, you know, Edith saying, hey, this patriarchal system is the issue. Like, unless we really address this, what are we doing? It says us talking in these closed groups of lovely women, and we're all trying to do our own little work in our own bubbles, and not like, what does this take?
No, I agree.
Hope someone can answer me.
No, I'm going to answer you because I want to have the solution. So I have spent the last 3 years really just consumed by this question. What is going on? Why hasn't it changed? Why is the dial not changing? Why is it not changing for businesses when they spend thousands of pounds on consultants? Why is it not changing in education when we've got a majority of females and feminism still isn't really sort of put on the table? Why isn't it changing? And that comes to what I call this Kaplunk model of what we've got. And actually, I think by looking at, I've actually started doing a doctorate in the bias in education because I'm so pumped up about it all. And basically what I think is, in this country, it's not going to come from the current government. So our model isn't going to the Department of Education and saying, please, can you fund us as a grassroots organisation? We've decided, Kat Wildman and I, as the 2 female founders, both with 3 young kids, everyone's looking around for someone else to make it happen. And we said, do you know what? Why can't it be us? If it's no one else, why can't it be us? And that's what we've done. So we've worked, there's pictures of me sitting next to the toilet as my twins are in the bath, as I'm on a computer trying to recruit more people to help me. And I think for schools, it is the individual school by school, head teacher, school board by school board doing it. Because if you think about a region that it's so complicated and the needs are so personalized, even within one classroom, 1 year group, it really needs a kind of slow, sustainable tackle. And I think instead of looking out, we need to look in. And again, the GC, what we kind of say is, we know you are excellent at leading your organisation. We want you to be excellent with diversity, equality and inclusion, and we give you all the tools. So it's all there for you to do in your own time, in your own way. We will benchmark it. We will help set you on your way. And the reason we did it, Kathleen, is because we could see no one else, no other solution for it. There's lots of closed groups like this with women agreeing and getting angry. And frankly, it gets quite boring when you want an easy solution. So what we've done is try to create an easy solution, but we can't do it on our own. We've got 300 people like Edith in our collective who help us learn and are educating us all the time, because we don't have all the answers. We've got a solution and not all the answers. And I think it's that willingness to say, do you know what? This isn't working. Where do I start? And just having somewhere to kick off from. So my hope is that more school leaders will feel empowered. The research shows us, when you look at change with feminism, it isn't about changing the minds of the people that are having a nice time, thank you very much. It's about empowering the people that are being marginalised or missing opportunities. And that's the same when it comes to anti-racism, and it's the same when it comes to sexism as well. And I think by empowering the people so they feel that they want to change it, they speak up, they say, do you know what? I'm 44, I'm menopausal, I'm really struggling with this at the moment, I need to have some flexible working. Or do you know what? My child's got a disability, I need to take time off to deal with that. The people who can start to be more authentic in their workplace and can feel safer and be more themselves will be more productive for those workforce. And if nothing else, it's those economic values, that retention of staff, which will drive that difference, even if people aren't doing it for the students and their outcomes.
I totally agree with everything you just said. And like, isn't this where feminism also went wrong in the 20th century? Like the people with the most power, the white women with middle class backgrounds, took that power and oppressed the other people who they should have been lifting up. So I think, yeah, groups like WomenED really have a real need to address their own issues in this respect. And I really love how in the chat, a lot of people have been talking about the kind of the ethos of schools and the values of schools, and whether or not they really teach kids the right thing. Like, do we want them to be so compliant? And I would like to kind of speak up for the students as well and encourage us all to bring them into the conversation, because I think that, and this also is a way in which Be Her Lead has changed since we started. I think now the workshops that we run with teachers and students, we encourage the teachers as much as possible to center the young people, to center the girls that they're working with in the conversations that they're having. The workshops that they run are much, like in the past couple of years since we've been running this, the workshops look very different now. That the opinions and the experiences of the students are at the center, and they're not so teacher-led. The activities that we give them, the resources that we give them, we kind of offer as tools for discussion that can be thrown out of the window if there's an interesting experience or topic that comes up in the conversation. So I think it's really important that in all of this, we include the young people who the schools are there for in the conversation, and also give them more of the power, which is a scary but potentially transformative thing to do.
No, it's, and just, I'm jumping in again, but Edith's so right. And actually what tends to happen, and particularly around conversation with WomenED, because WomenED is around roots for headships and leaderships, it's not actually identifying what the feminism means for the students. So what a leader of a certain age, even myself in that, would consider to be feminism wouldn't be the same as, you know, my young daughter, for example. And I think that's important to do. If you are thinking about it as a school, you have to bring in all the stakeholders to that as well. And I think WomenED, I'm looking in the chat, WomenED is great in respect that it gets women talking about the roots of headship with a sprinkling of feminism, but actually for feminism, it needs to go beyond recruitment and leadership, and actually beyond the curriculum, to really work out where that inequality is, and where the celebration can be honed in as well.
I would argue that, at least in the international schools where we are at the moment, where, you know, I'm highly connected with all the top leaders on the planet. The source of power is in boards, which are not representative of of these values, and they're sometimes hostile to what we're talking about. And then we have a large number of leaders who have not had any access to this kind of conversation, nor are really interested into that access. So I would argue, until you're directing at the power structures, the real power in schools has to come from boards and leaders to say, this is how we're going to do it. And like, the only advantage I've had is that I've had the power to say, I'm going to empower others. That includes the student voice and, you know, changing the curriculum, because I have power to make real change. But most women in schools and most of what we're talking about is not really toppling this old-fashioned power. I would say, for example, most of these schools, these top schools, are all supported by the US State Department. So where's the pressure from the US State Department that their leaders in their various groups must take this sort of training, must examine critically that this becomes a part of the grant that happens in the school. We're not targeting where the change makers are. And the only reasons I've been able to achieve anything at my school is because it's on my shoulders. I have this on my shoulders to do this, and I have an opportunity. And I want to take that opportunity. I am in meetings with directors around the world who have zero interest in what's happening at the moment. Zero. And even though they'll have DIJ training and they'll have some things happening, the real change makers are not being challenged at a level that puts true pressure on them. I did a training on LGBT support for students a few years ago. And the case I used was with, I had a US State Department official call me and say, my child is bisexual. Is your school safe for my child to attend? And I was able to go through and say, these are the things, and these are the things I worry about in my school. The pressure on these conversations have to come from those who have the money in these groups. These are, like I said, the pressure of boards and everything else is on growth, academic achievement, all the things that we are not talking about at the moment. Like, the conversation is not happening in the power structures that need to have this conversation.
Okay, I'm gonna hop in there, because yes, we feel this disheartening moment, and you know, everybody who's here has been talking about how we want to be part of this change, and how do we get leaders, you know, if we don't have a school head like you, how do we get leaders to start listening? We've had suggestions in the chat about this being consumer driven, about this coming from the students themselves, the alumni and the families. Is that the simplest and fastest way to change? Does it mean that
our parents are some of our worst allies with this?
Right.
Unfortunately.
Any ideas from anyone else?
I don't have a solution, but I have a question I would be really interested to hear Kathleen and also Nick's answer to, which is leading on from that question.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, and I don't know the answer to this, and I know that international schools are different from a lot of other independent schools in that they occupy a particular place in a country. But is it possible for a fee-paying school, even one with bursaries and scholarships, to be feminist in an intersectional sense? Because can a school that charges fees really avoid, to some extent, being an elitist structure? That's my question.
Well, we're a school that charges fees, and you know, so, and we are part of that elitist structure as well. And you know, I think that yes, it is possible, but it is leader driven. And all this, the evidence on how a school changes culture, it's on the burden of the top leader, not the middle leaders, not the you know, the curriculum coordinator, which is every woman's favorite job to apply for. It's on those who make it through the top. And this is, I highly encourage those in this audience, and everyone who knows me tells me that I'm always Every time I'm in a conversation with them, you must go to the top. You can't stop in these middle places. We need you to change schools so that you can empower others. And that's what I'm talking about. And finding other leaders who like us. There are definitely men who belong here and who believe this, but they're not the majority. And their blind spots are very large on these topics. We must move forward with getting more women into the headship.
My response would be yes. I think Kathleen's absolutely right, and then you've got the decision makers who would be have more empathy for it. So with our work, we work with big corporates as well, and the whole reason that we are aimed at being accessible is because we want to bring people in who don't see that this has anything to do with them. They don't think they got a problem with diversity and inclusion because they're all white, so race isn't a problem. They're all privileged, so socioeconomic status isn't an issue. And what we do is we talk to them in the language that they understand. So we talk about results, we talk about the data, and they create their own data. And then with the assessments that they do, which is a series of statements, there is no getting away from it. I would leave this organisation unless they put flexible working in. When you have a school that comes back and 30% of your staff say that, you take notice. So it's all been designed to force people down a route where they think they might be just ticking boxes, but actually they have in the top level psychometric test, and then they've got statements, so there's no wiggle room to hide in. So again, Kathleen, that was part of what we did because we saw what didn't work, and that is working with major corporates in this country and international corporates. So Kat Wildman, who's my co-founder, she used to work at the Telegraph, which you might have heard of as a news outlet. She was the first. She created the first app for Time Out magazine and things like that. So between Kat and myself, we are trying to push those people into places where they don't want to be pushed, but we do it in a very bright way, not in a name shaming, not in a calling out, not in an aggressive way, because I think if we go back to the idea of feminism, that's where it falls down. It becomes an angry, pointy, accusationally space. And actually, if you're not interested, you back away from it. So that's one of the ways that we're doing it. And I would love you to introduce me to everyone you know on the planet, Kathleen, and get me in front of them, and I will speak to them and I will make them identify and understand why this is important.
Let's do it. But we also need to get their board members who are often highly racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and that they see that there is, you know, I've been in diversity meetings with corporates, and you probably have heard it too, the business case for diversity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these terms make me feel ill to say this, but this is sometimes the approach that some of these people might listen to.
That's it. They're my sweet spot, those people. So I like to get them. It feels more.
You love a challenge, Nick. That's what I like about you. The one thing that has come in the questions, which I think is an important quick point to touch on, is there a way, if there are teachers who are interested in getting access to the app, Nick, if their school is not behind it, how can teachers start to upskill and engage, even if the leadership work is not happening?
That's a great question. And actually, the timing of this is brilliant. So on Monday, we're actually launching GCCPD. So one of the things that's come through, even though the price may not be a barrier, and where schools are slowly coming on board or they're just trialing it across a cluster, we are launching the GCCPD on Monday. So this will be a safe space to learn about diversity and inclusion. We are bringing our collective into it. So hopefully people like Edith will be there. We're going to have a book club with our authors like Dr. Gina Rippon is going to come and speak, Emma Turner about flexible working. And then we're going to let our community lead us on where we want it to go. So that's coming on Monday, and individuals can join up from that for as little as £3 a month. And the money will go to pay the people from marginalised communities for their services.
Thank you. That's brilliant. So I'm sure we will have, well, we have your contact details that people can reach out to you at gec.org. But I would like to touch on a couple of points because we're really, really close to time. And I know that we've had some excellent starting discussions taking place in the chat. Ellen at Sea Change Mentoring has mentioned that we could learn from what CIS has been able to accomplish regarding child safeguarding and diversity, equity, inclusion and justice work, holding schools accountable via standards and regulation. And I just want to hear maybe from Kathleen on this. Is that something that you think is possible?
This is something I've been working. This is something that NEOSC is working on, and they've put it into their new ACE standards for international schools, and something that I've been a part of and very proud to that we have said, listen, we need to be brave because the accreditation power is important. And when a school, it gives a school leader who is nervous or scared to say, I need to do this because it says I have to. So this kind of piece is there. But it also challenges national systems to move forward if they want to get that kind of high level accreditation status. One of the things that we wanted to have specifically written, which many DEIJ movements won't mention for schools, is LGBTQ issues, because this is so, this is worse than the F word. And so NEOSC is doing this, and I think CIS should be pushed towards this as well. And it has to be super explicit. Like, what is this part of the international survey? There's a question, if you identify in this way, how do you feel about these things? Like, so this is another area of power that would support real change. So yes, absolutely. Let's push these organizations to make this part of their standards.
Thank you. And I know that Tricia Friedman is here with us live, and she has been drawing our attention to some of the work done at her former institution, the UWC Southeast Asia. So take a look at what they have done for inspiration. We have the middle leader there on our Women in International Education SIG group. She's been doing fantastic work. I don't know if Angeline, you want to name check a little bit the work that she's been doing.
Oh yeah. So I think in our SIG group, our special interest group for women in education, one of the members is Erin Robinson, who shared what they were doing at the United World College in Southeast Asia. She's actually going to be moving to another school, but that work will be continued by Jessica Huang as well, who's a member of the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color. And so there's a lot of work happening all around in international schools globally as well. And it's great to hear from Kathleen about NEASC leveraging the power that they have in order to hold schools accountable, and also equipping leaders with the tools that they could use in order to also hold boards accountable and the community, and also measures in the same way that the GEC app can help us measure in order, because if we're not having that as a way of looking at, are we actually making progress, and do we actually how are we going to hold ourselves accountable, and what does that look like? And so something that I've been curious about too is do we need, what is the role of quotas, for example? And is this something that we would need in order to make progress more rapidly and to accelerate it? What are your thoughts about quotas? Edith, what do you think?
About quotas?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on how they're implemented, right? Because if quotas are implemented without a will from the community, then they can backfire and be seen as a kind of another form of oppression or tick boxing, and that can actually do feminism a disservice. So it has to be about the way in which they're implemented and the way in which they're explained. I also kind of wanted to go back to an earlier point as well about leadership and the importance of female leadership in education, because I do think it is important, but I also think that a focus on leadership as the key to change and getting and an obsession with counting the numbers of female leaders and globally has also been a way in which feminism has kind of lost track and lost focus on the huge majority of women who are below the poverty line. So I think the same thing needs to happen in schools as well. Yeah, of course, it's really important. And I wish that Kathleen had been the head of my school that I used to teach at.
I don't. I'm a disaster.
We have cause to clone you, Kathleen, in the chat, by the way.
Honestly.
So much. But
ask my employees what they think.
But I did have a female leader in the school that I taught at who did not identify as feminist and was not particularly supportive of women or girls issues in the school. So yeah, I would caveat that and say that grassroots movements, grassroots action are also vital in any, if you look at sort of any successful social movement across the globe and over the past couple of centuries, like grassroots action really does work, and young people's voices in particular are key. So I think that if we can have a kind of like both, you know, action,
it's the pressure, it's the right. Real pressure has to come,
and the
stop being nice.
Yeah, and the misconception that if you have action happening at different levels, then those different groups are fighting each other is also another way in which feminism has messed up, because we now have a kind of movement that's just fighting within itself all the time about the right way to be a feminist, which is like just a complete waste of energy. So I think that if we can have that happening on different levels within a school, that would be the ideal situation.
Yeah, I think an example of that for me recently is like in a space like this, for example, people will question, oh, well, where are the men on this panel? But no one has questioned for such a long time when there were only men on panels.
Right.
And so there's also been so you kind of like, you know, damned you do, damned you don't, and so on. And yeah.
My work all the time, I totally relate to that. I like often have people saying, oh, what about be his lead? And I'm like, well, yeah, sure, start that yourself. I'm not the person to do that. Like, obviously, I'm not saying that boys don't also need these kinds of spaces and support and like space to talk about their feelings and their experiences. But like the way that I kind of stop my head from exploding is by seeing myself as or my work as a piece of a wider jigsaw puzzle. I feel like Nick has a much harder role because she's like she is the jigsaw. But for me, I'm like, okay, I'm not saying that be her lead is the solution, but it's a piece of a bigger jigsaw puzzle. And the way that we work is by starting very small, like creating a very inclusive, safe space within a school, and then working outwards. But I also think that a really important part of our work is partnering with other organizations doing different things. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We say about collaboration, not competition. And also I think where you're in a space where elbows could be quite sharp, I find, which is, you know, very ironic, so it's an inclusion, that actually you're a creator or a destroyer. And I said, you know, go out there, go create your own if you want to, go for it. You know, the more people on this bus, the better. But you don't need to be a destroyer. That doesn't help anyone.
That's a great way. That's a great way to finish. And I know that we're now 7 minutes over time, and I know we could have probably a whole conference devoted to this, which is something we should consider.
Yes.
But yeah, we'd love to take the time to thank you all for tuning in live and to give up your, you know, the beginning of your evenings for us, but also to our wonderful panelists for just their passion and energy in driving this forward, because all of you individually are doing work that will join up these many little fires being started. And not that we're destroyers, we are creators of fire. And thank you all for your great comments. I'm going to try and save the chat before we hop off so that we've got some references to share with you. We'll put them up along the recording on the UCIS webpage. And we'd just like to thank all of you for your work individually and for being part of this. We will do what we can as far as the SIG, and I can see that Cam is right there backing that up. That work will continue to happen under her watch at UCIS.
Can I just quickly do a tiny plug?
Of course.
Because we're now running our teacher training online, and our program we're now fully set up to do it virtually or in person. We're more than open to applications from teachers in international schools. So if anyone's interested in finding out more, then just go to our website.
Great.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
if
you.
this is, yeah, and also if this has gotten you all fired up to continue talking about feminism in schools, feminist issues and so on. So WomenED DE is also having a one-day virtual conference on Saturday, the 29th of May. So do look us up and sign up, and there are lots of different sessions available then as well. So thank you very, very much for all of your time. And yeah, thank you very much for the panelists, and also to Joe and ECIS for helping sponsor and collaborating with WomenED as well. So Kyra, did you want to just pop up our little call to action on the end there as we close as well? So we like to end with a few questions that we have here. So just as a reflection piece for yourself as you go off into the next week, as your week continues, think about, are your actions promoting gender equity or maybe perpetuating inequity? And are you part of upholding a historically patriarchal institution or part of building a feminist institution perhaps? And what will you do next? So those are our call to action here.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll make sure the recording is up, share it widely. And if you have further questions or you've been fired up, please do contact us, reach out and get involved however you would like to, however you can. Thanks again and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.